4:57 a.m. Phoenix, Arizona, June 9th, 2026. 212 federal agents moved simultaneously across 14 commercial addresses spread between the Phoenix metro area and greater Albuquerque, New Mexico. No sirens, no public announcements. Temperature already at 82 degrees Fahrenheit before sunrise. The desert air carrying the smell of cooling asphalt and dry creosote from the vacant lots bordering South Central Avenue. At a converted auto body shop on South Central Avenue in South Phoenix, a 6-person tactical team held position outside a utility corridor on the building's north face. They had been in position since 4:30 a.m. At the 1-minute mark, the team leader confirmed readiness on encrypted radio to all 14 entry teams across both metropolitan areas. At exactly 4:57, he gave the signal. The breach took 11 seconds. Beyond the paint bays, through a secondary corridor with a numeric keypad, behind a reinforced steel door that had never appeared on any city building permit, federal agents found 23 adult workers sleeping on stripped concrete floors. Guatemalan nationals, Honduran nationals. Their passports were in a locked file cabinet in the manager's office. Their wages had been calculated and deducted each week against debts that grew faster than mathematics allowed them to escape. The room they occupied had been sealed from the outside every night. There was no interior release mechanism. Their ages ranged from 22 to 47. The most recent arrival had been there 4 months. The earliest had entered the facility in October 2023. 2 years and 8 months without leaving the building. This is what it took to find them. The case did not begin with a federal wire intercept. It did not begin with a confidential informant inside the organization or a tip from a foreign intelligence partner. It began with a parts and supply driver who had been trying to explain something he had seen to himself for 6 months before he finally picked up a phone. Marcus Webb's observations, what investigators made of them, and how they eventually brought 212 agents to 14 entry points before sunrise. This is that story. Parts of it remain unsettled as charges move through federal court, and those parts are almost as disturbing as what's already documented in the public record. Desert Pro Auto Restoration launched in 2019 as a single-location operation in Scottsdale, Arizona, serving luxury and exotic vehicle owners who wanted certified restoration and collision work at factory standards. The business pitched well. The finish work earned regional recognition. Client testimonials were genuine. Yelp ratings across all locations averaged 4.8 stars. By 2022, 5 locations. By 2024, 14 locations across Arizona and New Mexico, with a combined workforce the company reported to state employment records as over 230 employees. Annual gross revenues, per state filings, exceeded $22 million. Desert Pro sponsored 3 youth racing leagues across 3 counties, donated restored vehicles to municipal resale programs, and paid all required insurance premiums and tax filings on schedule. The company won regional best workplace designations in 2022, 2023, and 2024. A Scottsdale business publication ran a profile in fall 2024 on the company's owner of record, Eduardo Salcedo Varela, framing him as a model of entrepreneurial discipline in Arizona's service economy. The profile mentioned the workforce, the community partnerships, the celebrity clients who posted restoration photos, and tagged the company on social media. The article did not mention the 3 locations where sealed rooms behind the paint bays were vented through garden hoses routed through drywall, because the journalist who wrote the article had no reason to look for them. On every metric that a state business registry, a commercial bank, a labor inspector conducting a routine visit, or a journalist writing a business profile would normally examine, Desert Pro was exactly what it appeared to be. The recruitment happened outside the United States, through independent contractors operating in Guatemala City and in San Pedro Sula, Honduras. These contractors worked by word of mouth, approaching skilled tradespeople in neighborhoods with high concentrations of automotive workers, painters, mechanics, laborers with commercial finishing experience. The pitch was consistent and specific. Skilled work in American auto body shops, legal entry on work visas being processed, good wages, accommodation arranged on arrival, transportation covered. The only cost was an advance ranging from $4,000 to $6,000 per person to cover crossing logistics and documentation. That advance would be repaid from wages over the first 6 to 8 months. The recruits were adults. They were experienced workers with real skills. They signed documents that they were told were standard American employment contracts. The documents were written in English. Most of the recruits did not read English. Federal forensic linguists who reviewed the documents after the raid confirmed that the actual text did not describe employment. It described an indentured service arrangement in which the company retained the right to hold all documentation pending resolution of the transportation debt and to determine, at its sole discretion, whether a worker's performance justified continued placement. By the time recruits reached Phoenix, the debt had grown from the stated $4,000 to $6,000 figure. Fees added during transit included accommodation en route, a documentation processing charge, a security deposit held by the company, and a per-person placement fee. Total debt on arrival ranged from $9,000 to $14,000 per worker. Then the deduction schedule activated. Housing, $600 per month deducted. Meals provided by the company, $400 per month deducted. A line item described in documents only as a safety and security fee, $200 per month deducted. Medical treatment when provided, billed at cost plus an administrative surcharge, deducted. On a wage of $12 per hour, working 18 hours per day, 7 days per week, a worker generated approximately $2,500 per month in gross wages before deductions. After deductions, the net amount credited to the worker's internal account, maintained by the company, not accessible to the worker, was approximately $300 to $400 per month. That net was applied against the transportation debt. At $300 per month net, against a debt compounding at 2% monthly, with additional discretionary fees applied at the company's judgment, the debt did not shrink. It grew. Federal forensic accountants, working through the ledgers recovered in the post-raid seizure, calculated that the average worker would have required between 12 and 19 years to reach a zero balance under the accounting system Desert Pro applied. The formula was not an approximation. It was precise, internally consistent across all 23 individual ledgers, and administered with a level of documentary detail that the forensic report described as incompatible with informal record-keeping. Someone had designed that formula deliberately. Workers were told their passports were being held for safekeeping. Workers who asked for them were told the documents would be returned when the transportation debt was resolved. The rooms were locked from the outside at night by a system controlled from the manager's office. There was no interior release. Marcus Webb had been driving parts and supply routes for an automotive wholesale distributor out of Chandler for 11 years. His circuit ran 12 to 15 stops per day. Commercial auto shops across Tempe, Glendale, and South Phoenix. 3 Desert Pro locations were on his regular route. He first noticed the man in October 2025. A stocky individual, mid-30s, close-cropped dark hair, consistently present at the South Central Avenue location when Webb arrived between 10 and 10:30 a.m., always in the paint prep area. Never outside for a break, never at the service counter, never in the kind of ambient, incidental conversation that exists in any functional workplace between coworkers. The brief exchange near the coffee machine, the complaint about a difficult repair job, the comment about the weather outside. Webb did not find this remarkable at first. Some people worked quietly. He saw the same man 3 weeks later at the Levine location, 6 miles south. Same clothes, same posture, same complete absence of social ease. Workers moving between Desert Pro locations was not uncommon. The chain ran centralized scheduling, and employees transferred routinely. But people who moved between locations were aware of their own movement. They commented on the commute or noted the different clientele. This man showed no indication of having traveled voluntarily. He appeared to have been moved. Webb saw him again at the Maryvale location in December 2025. 3 different facilities, 6-week intervals between sightings. And at all 3 locations, at some point during Webb's delivery, the man disappeared through a door at the back of the paint bay. Not a supply room, not a restroom, but a door with a mounted card reader. Auto body shops don't have keycard doors, Webb told federal investigators months later. I've been in hundreds of them. They have push-bar fire exits and padlocks. That door was something different. Webb turned what he had seen over in his mind through December and into January 2026. He constructed possible innocent explanations. A specialized technician who moved between locations for a technique not every shop had equipment for. A chemical storage room requiring access control. A man with social anxiety and a coincidental schedule. None of the explanations resolved the keycard door. He filed an anonymous tip with the FBI's Phoenix field office tip line on February 3, 2026. He described what he had seen over the preceding months. He gave the approximate physical description of the man he had observed. He noted the 3 locations. He described the card reader door. He said it felt wrong. The tip sat in the queue for 9 days before it was flagged. What the automated cross-referencing system flagged was not the physical description and not the keycard door. It was the location data, specifically the 3 Desert Pro addresses, matching a prior entry from August 2025. A former Desert Pro employee who had quit after 2 months at the South Central location had filed a brief written complaint stating that workers in the back of the facility seemed scared to talk and never left the property during breaks, even in summer heat. That August tip had been reviewed, assigned a follow-up priority designation, and then not acted on. It sat in the database for 6 months, technically open, with no investigator assigned to it. When the February 2026 tip triggered the location match, the combined file landed on the desk of Special Agent Diana Reyes, assigned to the Phoenix Field Office's Labor Trafficking Task Force since 2024. She reviewed both tips on the morning of February 12th. She ran a financial query on Desert Pro. She ran background checks on the registered principals. She cross-referenced the entity through the FBI's Interstate Financial Intelligence database. What she found in the first 2 hours of that search was sufficient to open a formal investigation. Desert Pro's financial picture had 2 distinct layers. The surface layer was clean, annual revenues of $22 million from collision services, payroll taxes filed on schedule, workers' compensation premiums current, business licensing active across both states. On every metric that routine commercial auditing examines, the business presented no red flags. Below that layer, visible only through the subpoena process, 3 anomalies emerged. The first, Desert Pro's payroll disbursements were inconsistent with its reported workforce. The company claimed more than 200 employees. Payroll records flowing through the primary business accounts showed disbursements consistent with approximately 180 workers. The remaining 50 to 60 were being compensated through a separate internal account that did not route through standard payroll processing. That account was labeled in internal bookkeeping as Operations Reserve. The second, paint supply and chemical solvent invoices at Desert Pro were running at approximately 300% above industry benchmarks for auto body shops at equivalent revenue levels. The company was purchasing 4 times as much paint thinner as comparable operations. The excess had no corresponding increase in revenue from paint services. The third, utility costs at 3 specific locations, South Central, Laveen, and Maryvale, were running at approximately 140% of what commercial auto shops of the same footprint should require. HVAC loads at those 3 locations had been elevated consistently for the full 14 months of utility records retrievable under the initial grand jury subpoena. That third anomaly changed the investigation's direction. A HVAC load running consistently at 140% across 3 specific locations for over a year meant those buildings were conditioning significantly more air volume than their permitted footprints required. The difference was not marginal, it was structural. The buildings were ventilating rooms that did not appear on any permit. Reyes brought the utility data to the FBI Technical Operations Unit's thermal imaging specialist in mid-March 2026. Warrants for aerial thermal surveillance of all 3 flag locations were obtained from the federal magistrate within 72 hours. The first thermal pass over the South Central property occurred on the night of March 18, 2026. The imaging identified a heat signature in a section of the building that did not appear on the county assessor's floor plan. A space of approximately 900 to 1,200 square feet behind the paint bays, in an area county records listed as a vacant equipment room, it was not vacant. Multiple heat signatures, consistent with human bodies in stationary positions, filled the space. The thermal data established that people were inside the hidden space. It did not establish who they were, how they had arrived, or by what mechanism they were being held. For a forced labor prosecution, investigators needed direct evidence of coercion. The specific instruments by which workers were prevented from leaving, denied wages, or threatened. The legal architecture of Desert Pro made building that evidence unusually difficult. I spent considerable time reviewing the financial subpoena records attached to this case file, and one structural feature stands out. The management layer between Desert Pro's owner of record and the day-to-day operations at the flag facilities was deliberately engineered to absorb legal scrutiny without transmitting it to the controlling principals. The 7 facility managers responsible for South Central, Levine, Maryvale, and the surrounding shops had no direct employer of record relationship with Desert Pro itself or with Salcedo Varela. They were technically employed through a Nevada-registered LLC that held the operations reserve account and functioned as the formal payroll entity for the shadow workforce. That LLC's registered principal was a business formation attorney based in Reno who had no other documented connection to Desert Pro. Tracing the payment flows backward through the LLC's structure required 3 separate grand jury subpoenas to 2 different banks and 1 fintech payment processor. Each subpoena required individual judicial approval. The third subpoena, the one that finally identified a direct financial connection between Salcedo Varela and the shadow payroll account, was not approved until April 2026. 6 weeks, 3 subpoenas, 2 banks, 1 payment processor, 1 attorney's registration standing between the visible company and the hidden one. Every time we hit a wall, Reyes noted in an internal operational debrief that was later attached to the court record, we had to go back to the magistrate and demonstrate that the next step was supported by what we'd already documented. The law was working exactly as designed. It was just slow. The wall came down when the payment processor records showed a recurring transfer, weekly every Thursday, consistent across 11 months of records, from the Operations Reserve LLC to a prepaid debit card issuer. The cards were loaded in denominations that matched almost exactly the net wage figures the forensic accountants had already calculated from the reconstructed debt ledgers. They were distributed physically at the 3 flag locations, on a known schedule, by a courier who arrived in an unmarked pickup truck and departed within 10 minutes each week. The truck was registered to Eduardo Salcedo Varela. Put yourself in Diana Reyes's position at that moment. You have thermal evidence of occupied hidden rooms at 3 locations. You have a financial trail connecting the payments to the owner. You have 2 anonymous tips from independent sources, 9 months apart, describing restricted movement at the same building. You are 7 months into an investigation, and you still do not know, with certainty, whether the people behind those walls are being held voluntarily, under deception, or under active threat. The only way to know for certain was to get someone inside. In late April 2026, Reyes coordinated with the US Marshals Service to insert an undercover operative into the Desert Pro applicant pool. The operative, identified in court documents only as UC7, applied through the company's public job posting portal for an automotive painter position at the Glendale location. UC7 carried a fully constructed cover identity, a fabricated work history in Arizona's commercial painting sector, a driver's license issued to the cover name, and professional references that, if called, would route to assigned agents. The application produced a callback in 9 days. The Glendale interview consisted of standard questions about tool experience, availability, and familiarity with specific paint systems. UC7 completed a practical skills assessment on a test panel and was offered a position, not at the Glendale location, at South Central. UC7 accepted and reported for a first shift at 7 a.m. on May 5, 2026. The first 3 days at South Central produced nothing operationally dramatic. Standard paint bay work under standard supervision. A crew that was evidently skilled but did not engage in the ambient conversational texture of a functional workplace. Short answers to direct questions, eyes that moved away from unfamiliar faces, a collective behavioral posture throughout the facility that UC7 described in debrief reports as consistent with learned social invisibility, people who had been conditioned not to draw attention. On the fourth day, UC7 was moved to a secondary workspace behind the main paint bays. Access required a numeric keypad code given without comment by the shift supervisor. The secondary space held 9 workers visible on first entry, completing the same paint prep tasks as the primary bay, in a room with no windows, lower ceilings, and a single air return vent providing the only ventilation. The workers did not acknowledge UC7's arrival the way co-workers acknowledge the addition of a new colleague. They acknowledged it the way people in a controlled environment acknowledge any change in their conditions, with minimal reaction and no curiosity. The reinforced door to the living quarters was at the far end of that secondary corridor. UC7 never accessed what lay beyond it, but operational confirmation was complete. UC7 remained in place for 11 days, documenting the facility's physical layout, the identity and schedule of the 7 managers, the supply delivery schedule, and one detail that completed the evidentiary chain. The Thursday courier, arriving in an unmarked silver pickup, distributing prepaid debit cards, and departing within 8 minutes. Vehicle registration, Eduardo Salcedo Varela. On May 19th, UC7 was extracted on the pretext of a family emergency. The cover held. No contact at South Central or at the corporate office had flagged the operative. The undercover phase was complete. The evidence package, as of late May 2026, was sufficient for a federal arrest warrant. Thermal surveillance, utility records, financial subpoenas, and 11 days of undercover documentation had built a case that federal prosecutors characterized as strong on both the trafficking and money laundering charges. The question was no longer whether to move. It was whether to enter the 3 flag locations in sequence or all 14 simultaneously. If you've followed trafficking takedowns before, what matters is the precision of the timing. What agents found inside those rooms needs no embellishment. The numbers carry their own weight. Senior Inspector Cal Doherty of the US Marshals Service, coordinating tactical planning, presented the options at a joint operational meeting on May 28th. Sequential entry carried lower coordination complexity. It also carried the risk that the first arrest would generate radio traffic and that someone with a phone would call ahead to the remaining locations before entry teams could reach them. A single warning call could result in workers being moved, documents being shredded, or suspects fleeing. Simultaneous entry required 14 separate teams across 2 metropolitan areas, executing within a window of no more than 90 seconds. Zero margin for vehicle failure, communication disruption, or navigational error. "We go all at once or we don't go," Doherty said. "If we hit 3 and someone makes a call in the first minute, we've done 7 months of work to produce 3 cases and 0 arrests at 11 others. The decision, all 14 simultaneously. Operational planning took 11 days. On June 3, 2026, 6 days before the scheduled entry, The surveillance team monitoring the South Central property filed an emergency report. The loading dock on the building's south face, the primary planned breach point for the South Central entry team, had been partially demolished overnight. A commercial construction crew with a current city permit was rebuilding it. The permitted work schedule ran from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. The construction crew would not be present at 4:57 a.m. on June 9th. But the demolition had rendered the dock structurally compromised, and the original entry plan was no longer viable. Doherty convened an emergency tactical review the morning of June 4th. Engineers from the FBI's Tactical Support Unit reviewed original building permits against current satellite imagery of the construction state. They identified a secondary access route, a utility corridor on the building's north face, accessible through an exterior vent housing connecting to the main paint bay through a former equipment passage. The corridor was viable, but the reinforced living quarters door, documented by UC7 as a custom steel core installation with both a card reader and a supplemental deadbolt releasable only from the manager's office control panel, required hydraulic breach equipment not already staged in Phoenix. The equipment was sourced from the FBI's Tactical Logistics Depot in Denver. It arrived in Phoenix on June 7th, 2 days before the operation. By the evening of June 8th, the operational infrastructure was complete. 212 agents, 6 tactical breach teams for the 3 flag locations, 8 standard law enforcement entry teams for the remaining 11. Financial crimes officers at each location, ready to secure records under the search warrants. Victim services personnel from the Department of Health and Human Services pre-stage at a Phoenix Convention Center reserved under a commercial catering pretext. Medical teams, Spanish language translators, specialist translators proficient in Guatemalan Mam dialect and Honduran Garifuna, both languages represented in the anticipated victim population based on recruitment intelligence developed during the investigation. Trauma counselors, federal immigration attorneys present through an emergency services contract, prepared to begin T-visa intake paperwork for workers qualifying for trafficking victim protections. The legal infrastructure for the aftermath had required 3 weeks to assemble. The physical infrastructure for entry had required 11 days. The investigation itself had taken 7 months. At 10 p.m. on June 8th, Special Agent Reyes signed the final operational order and transmitted it to all 14 team leads via encrypted communication. 0457, she said on the all-hands conference. No team touches a door before the clock. We do this all at once. Here's what deserves to be said plainly. The August 2025 tip, the written complaint from a former Desert Pro employee describing workers who seemed frightened and never left the property even in summer heat, was reviewed, assigned a follow-up designation, and then not acted on for 6 months. 6 months during which 23 workers were waking up each morning on a concrete floor inside a locked room, running a debt that mathematics made permanent. That is not a resource failure. Federal agencies operate under resource constraints constantly. That is a prioritization failure. The tip was credible enough to retain. It was not credible enough to assign to an investigator with a deadline. If Marcus Webb's February tip had never come in, the August complaint might still be sitting in a database, technically open, with no one assigned to it. The agents who ran the investigation from February onward operated precisely and professionally. The system that allowed the first tip to expire for half a year did not. What strikes me about this case is not the scale of the financial laundering or the number of locations. It's the simplicity of what broke it open. One delivery driver, 6 months of private observation, one anonymous phone call to a tip line, no intelligence asset, no wiretap, no parallel investigation from a foreign agency, a man who drove parts to auto shops for a living and could not stop thinking about a key card door. 4:57 a.m., June 9th, 2026. At South Central, the utility corridor breach took 11 seconds. The 40-foot length of the corridor required 9 more seconds to clear. The fire code access door at the far end opened without resistance, exactly as the permit specifications had indicated it would from the corridor side. The paint bay beyond was dark. Equipment shut down for the shift change. Chemical solvent smelled dense in the confined air. Floor markings, tool racks, the industrial quiet of a workspace at rest. Through the numeric keypad corridor, the team leader entered the code recovered during UC7's operational phase into the secondary workspace. Empty. The workers had not yet been moved from the sleeping room to begin the day shift. At the reinforced door, the tactical team deployed the hydraulic spreading equipment sourced from Denver. 8 seconds. The door gave way. The space inside had originally been constructed as a ventilation equipment room, 38 feet by 22 feet. The HVAC systems that had occupied it had been removed and reinstalled outside in a prefab enclosure, a modification made without a permit in 2022. As established by the forensic engineering review of permit records that form part of the case file, in their place, 23 cots arranged in 3 rows, portable toilet facilities against the east wall, a sink fed by a garden hose routed through a hole in the drywall, a single fluorescent strip light that, per workers' subsequent statements to trauma counselors, ran continuously, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, without variation, for the full duration of their confinement. No natural light, no way to tell time except by the shift schedule. 23 workers. Their arrival dates, documented in the deduction ledgers recovered from the management office, spanned from October 2023 to January 2026. Most had been in the facility for more than 6 months. 3 had been there for more than a year. One worker, a Guatemalan national from the Huehuetenango region in the Western Highlands, had entered the facility in October 2023 and had not been outside since. 2 years and 8 months. At the Levine location, the entry encountered an unplanned complication. A Belgian Malinois security dog not present in any prior surveillance documentation. The animal was secured by trained handling personnel within 40 seconds, without injury to agents or the dog. 7 workers at Levine in a facility layout nearly identical to South Central. Same room dimensions, same cot arrangement, same single light fixture, suggesting the same contractor had built both concealed spaces to identical specifications. The Maryvale entry proceeded without complication. 9 workers, layout matching South Central almost exactly. The remaining 11 Desert Pro locations, not flagged by thermal data, not reflected in utility anomalies, not accessed by UC7, were entered simultaneously under the operational decision to treat all 14 as active until cleared. All 11 were clean. 218 legitimate employees working standard shifts with standard documentation, none of whom had any knowledge of what was occurring across town. Most arrived for work between 6:30 and 7 a.m. and encountered federal vehicles in their parking lots. Entering all 14 simultaneously cost additional planning and resources. It produced no additional arrests at the 11 clean locations. What it prevented was the scenario Doherty had described. A warning call made in the first 60 seconds. At the South Phoenix Corporate Management Office, a commercial suite not attached to any of the repair shops, financial crimes officers secured 83 boxes of business records, 11 laptop computers, 2 desktop workstations, and a fireproof safe. The safe contained $12,000 in cash, 8 prepaid debit cards with a combined balance of approximately $34,000, and 23 passports in a single manila envelope, alphabetically sorted by last name. Inside the back cover of each passport, a deduction ledger, every week's wages, every week's deductions, every week's net credit against a transportation debt the formula guaranteed could never reach zero. The ledgers were immaculate. Ink uniform, spacing consistent, the handwriting of someone who had kept these records as a professional obligation, not as an afterthought. At the South Central Paint Supply Room, a false panel behind a storage rack concealed 2 weapons caches, 12 semi-automatic rifles, approximately 2,000 rounds of ammunition, 4 semi-automatic handguns, and 1 pump-action shotgun. None of the weapons were registered to Desert Pro, to the facility, or to any of the 7 managers subsequently arrested. Their purpose, whether deterrence against worker escape, preparation for armed conflict with a rival operation, or some combination, was not established in the charging documents. 7 arrests were made across the Phoenix metro area between 4:57 a.m. and 6:42 a.m. 3 suspects were taken at their residences. 2 were arrested at a West McDowell Road restaurant where surveillance had confirmed they met regularly for early morning coffee before shift starts. They were in a corner booth when agents entered. 1 was arrested in his vehicle outside the South Central facility, having apparently received a phone call while the operation was in progress and driven to the location. He arrived to find federal vehicles blocking the entrance and tactical personnel on the roof. Eduardo Salcedo Varela was taken at his Scottsdale residence at 6:42 a.m. He was in his kitchen. He asked at the moment of arrest to make a phone call. He was advised of his rights. He declined to make a statement. The sun was fully above the horizon by the time the last arrest was confirmed. Somewhere across the city, at a Phoenix convention center, 23 people who had not been outside for months, some for more than a year, 1 for more than 2 years, were being evaluated by medical personnel, spoken to in their native languages by translators who had been briefed on regional dialects, and told by federal immigration attorneys that their status as trafficking victims entitled them to legal protections under federal law. The case was not over. In the ways that matter most for accountability, it had just begun. Here's the thing worth debating. When 2 independent, anonymous tips from 2 different sources describe signs of restricted movement at the same location 9 months apart, and formal investigation does not open until the second tip triggers an automated database match, is that a resource failure or a prioritization failure? We read every comment. Drop your read below. Federal charges were filed against all 7 defendants within 72 hours. The indictment included conspiracy to commit forced labor under Title 18, Section 1589, peonage under Section 1584, trafficking with respect to forced labor, and, for Salcedo Varela and 3 of the 7 managers, conspiracy to commit money laundering. Criminal forfeiture proceedings were initiated against the $18 million documented in the financial subpoenas. At a detention hearing on June 11th, all 7 were ordered held without bail. The government argued, and the magistrate agreed, that the combination of flight risk, the scale of the financial network, and the documented use of armed supervision at the facilities presented conditions that no bail arrangement could adequately mitigate. Medical evaluations of the 23 workers conducted over 2 days following the raid documented conditions consistent with prolonged exposure to paint chemicals in inadequately ventilated spaces. Several workers showed symptoms of mild to moderate respiratory compromise. 2 required hospitalization for malnutrition-related complications. The individual, who had been in the facility since October 2023, required specialized medical care arranged through the Federal Victim Services Program. All 23 received their original passports, returned from the seized envelope, processed, cleared, along with documentation of their eligibility for T-Visa status as trafficking victims and access to federal legal counsel. T-Visa processing under current timelines takes between 18 and 36 months. Employment authorization during that period is conditional on case status. This case demonstrates a specific failure mode in labor trafficking enforcement. The most resilient operations are the ones that build a functional legal business around the scheme. Desert Pro was not a shell. It was an operating, award-winning business with real clients and a legitimate workforce visible above the concealed level. That legitimacy enabled the scheme. Every anomaly that a labor inspector, a journalist, or an auditor might notice had an innocent explanation. Unusual purchase volumes reflected rapid expansion. Utility costs reflected equipment upgrades. The management structure reflected administrative efficiency. The scheme survived on the quality of its cover. The thermal signature of an occupied hidden room is detectable, but only if thermal surveillance is authorized and run. Thermal surveillance only gets authorized when someone files a tip that triggers a prior tip database match. That match only occurs because an automated system retained a 6-month-old complaint, and that complaint was only filed because a former employee was uncomfortable enough about what they had seen to write it down. Any single link in that chain breaks, and the investigation doesn't happen in the time frame it did. There is a line in the forensic accounting report attached to the indictment that reads almost like a case study in financial instrument design. The debt structure applied to victim workers was internally consistent, mathematically uniform across all 23 individuals, and administratively maintained with a level of precision incompatible with informal record-keeping practices. Someone designed that formula. Someone determined the interest rate, the fee schedule, the deduction categories, and the compounding mechanism that guaranteed debt growth would outpace any possible earnings rate. That person had professional-level training in financial structuring, accounting, law, or financial services, not auto body repair. That person has not been identified in any publicly available charging document. The 7 defendants in custody face potential sentences, if convicted on all counts, that could reach 30 years. Financial forfeiture proceedings, if successful, could recover some portion of the documented $18 million. Approximately $8.4 million has been located in frozen accounts as of the date of the public court filings. The remaining $9.6 million has not been found. The financial architecture of the laundering operation, the Nevada LLCs, the Wyoming Holding Company, the Texas Staffing Agency with no actual staffing history, the Cayman savings account held in a family member's name, was not built by anyone whose name appears in the current charging documents. It was built by someone with professional knowledge of how to move money through legitimate-seeming entities without triggering the automated systems that regulators use to detect unusual flows. That person is not in custody. Federal investigators have stated publicly that the investigation is continuing. The prepaid debit card issuer used to distribute worker wages, the one the Thursday Courier served, holds active accounts in 17 states, according to records cited in the financial portion of the federal case file. Will this turn out to be a standalone operation, or does the same financial architecture appear elsewhere under different business names? Comment yes if you think Desert Pro was unique, no if you think the structure was replicated elsewhere. We're following the financial thread closely. The 23 workers found on June 9th will navigate, over the months and years ahead, an immigration system that was not designed with their precise situation in mind. T-visa processing is slow. Employment authorization during the waiting period is conditional. The Federal Trafficking Victim Services Program provides a foundation, translation, legal counsel, medical referral, but not an unobstructed path. The 7 defendants will go to trial or accept plea agreements. The sentences, if convictions are obtained, will be measured in years. The financial forfeiture will recover some portion of the identified $18 million, with $9.6 million still unaccounted for. One detail that stayed with me: the alphabetically sorted passports in the manila envelope, each one with a deduction ledger tucked inside the back cover. Each ledger begins on the worker's arrival date. Each one ends on June 9th, 2026, midweek, mid-deduction cycle. Someone maintained those ledgers every week, consistently, for up to 2 years and 8 months. That is not the behavior of someone operating in panic or improvising. That is the behavior of someone who believed this was permanent. The recruitment network in Guatemala City and San Pedro Sula that sourced the workers has not been publicly addressed in any charging document filed as of this writing. The contractors who made the original pitch, who collected the initial advance payments, who told skilled workers that work visas were being processed, their accountability is not yet part of the public record. Subscribe so you don't miss what federal investigators are still uncovering. When the trial phase begins and the financial architect of this operation either surfaces or doesn't, that story is worth following. Desert Pro Auto Restoration won 3 consecutive Best Workplace Awards, It sponsored youth racing leagues. It held 23 people in a locked ventilation room for periods ranging from 4 months to 2 years and 8 months. The debt formula that made escape mathematically impossible is now a court exhibit. The rooms behind the paint bays are now evidence. The demand for cheap labor in industries that don't attract regular inspection was not dismantled on June 9th. The network is gone. What created the conditions for it remains.